Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of MercyOne Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. This program is brought to you in part by a grant from the Rosalie and Sherry Exline Ziegler Fund. And tonight we're going to talk about rewilding. And if you don't know what that is, you will by the time we're done. My guest tonight is Micah Mortali. Micah, greetings.
Greetings. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Where are you physically located right this minute?
In this moment, right now, I'm at Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health in the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts.
Western Massachusetts. So Micah grew up in Connecticut, went to high school in Connecticut, got his bachelor's at Connecticut College, and also has a master's in health sciences and is the founder and director of Kripalu. And we're going to learn more about Kripalu and what happens, and we're going to learn about rewilding, and we're going to learn about, how we need more, the advantages of getting more of nature in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about growing up. When did you realize that being outdoors was an essential component to joy and meaning and purpose?
Well, when I was a little kid, like probably 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, my folks built a house in the middle of the woods in Connecticut, and there was a period of time there, around a year or so, where we didn't have electricity, and so I kind of had this like little house in the prairie kind of experience for a little while there, where we had kerosene lanterns and a wood stove, and we even had a pump well, so we got our water from there. And so that was a formative experience. And growing up in the 80s in that kind of an environment, I just didn't have cable or video games or anything, so I ended up just kind of spending a lot of time outside and in the woods. And kind of what happened was, my parents got divorced when I was 6 years old, and then I went to live with my mom. And honestly, I think the divorce was really hard on me. And for the next, pretty much from that point until probably I ended up in college, there was this period of maybe 12 years where I think I was struggling. And I think that nature and being out in the woods and being outside was the way I self-medicated. It was how I soothed my nervous system. And there were different things that happened. Somewhat traumatic events occurred a couple of times where I just found myself going out to nature. And luckily I had nature around me so I could access it. And it was just something I did sort of instinctively as a child. It wasn't until I was an adult and I was looking back that I kind of realized what I had done. And that kind of led me to create the school here at Kripalu for mindful outdoor leadership. And then that informed a lot of the writing in the book as well.
Yeah, so as I'm sure a lot of life happens before you start a school that's going to help connect other people to what you have learned is important. Maybe tell us a little bit of your biography, what you did with life until you discovered that this was such an essential component of your life that you were going to create really a profession and a career around educating, informing, and bringing this philosophy of life to other people.
Yeah. Well, when I went to college, I really wasn't sure at all really who I was or what I wanted to do. I was 18, and but quickly after my first year, I sort of figured one thing out. And I think the first thing I figured out was I have these deep questions. I wasn't, when I was 18 or 19, like I wasn't thinking about like, how can I make money? I was thinking about like, what's the meaning of life? I was afflicted with having those kind of, questions that I was curious about, and they just gnawed at me, how did we get here? What happens after? And so I decided that I actually took a year off after my freshman year of college, and I started to read about, Zen Buddhism and, the Gnostic texts. And I started to explore different religions and different religious and mystical traditions. And I went back to college and studied religion. And that was great. I loved it. But I was always going from reading the ancient texts to going into the forest. And to me, those two pursuits were connected.
Hmm.
So what became my odyssey from that time until now has been, what is the connection between the human sort of quest for wisdom and meaning, um, and the wisdom that we find, and the solace we find in the created world, in the natural world. And so after college, I actually got a job in North Carolina in the Smoky Mountains, and I became a therapeutic wilderness counselor for at-risk youth. So for 3 years, I lived outside all year. And I had a group of 10 boys that I was kind of in charge of and cared for. And they went from 11 to 17 years old.
Wow.
So, and the boys were there for a whole year in that program. So I got to be with these kids for a long period of time. And that was kind of a rite of passage, I think, for me in like his early 20s, and trying to see what I was made of, what I could do, what my limits were. And, it was a very, very challenging job on a lot of different levels. Um, and it was actually down there when I was in North Carolina. That job actually, it was so stressful that I was kind of having like little PTSD moments sometimes. Like I'd wake up in the middle of the night, kind of thinking that the group was in my room on my days off. I'd wake up at night and be yelling at kids and thinking some crisis was going on, but I was just like in my room. And I was like, okay, so I'm really stressed out. And that's I started to really practice yoga. I found Kripalu yoga down there in North Carolina, and I had a really profound healing experience in a Kripalu yoga class that I found down there. And it was very cathartic. And I started to heal. I started to, find a way to connect into my body and to sort of let go of some of that fight or flight that I was living in. And I just felt a call to come up to Kripalu. So I eventually made my way up here and did the month-long yoga teacher training intensive. And that was 18 years ago. I've been here pretty much ever since.
Wow. And tell me the word Kripalu and the Kripalu Institute. Tell us a little bit more about that. I don't, does that word have a meaning outside of the name of the institute?
Yeah, so the root Kripalu is a Sanskrit word, and the root meaning is compassion. And so Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health is named after a man who was known as Swami Kripalu, and he was a holy man, a depth practitioner from India, and he was he had a very interesting life. And he was regarded in India as being like one of the greatest saints of the 20th century. He spent about 18 years in silence toward the end of his life. But he had a huge impact on many, many people. And one of his students came over to the United States in the 1960s, a gentleman named Amrit Desai. And Amrit started a small ashram in Pennsylvania, and it really grew and grew and grew. And Swami Kripalu came over to the United States in 1977 and was here for 4 years till 1981. He went back to India, and he died shortly after. But he had a huge impact on the people who got to spend time with him down in Pennsylvania. And after his death, the ashram moved from Pennsylvania up here to the building I'm in right now, in the Berkshires, in Stockbridge, Massachusetts.
Okay. And what started off as an ashram, and I invite you to maybe describe that a little bit more. It's become, would you say, more of a school and a center for individuals to engage not only in meditation and yoga, but in other nature pursuits?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in the early 90s, Kripalu changed from being a not-for-profit religious organization to being a not-for-profit educational organization. So we're a 501c3 not-for-profit, and our mission is to help people empower themselves and have like a really meaningful life through the transformative wisdom and practice of yoga. So yoga is kind of at the heart of our mission. And so we're the largest yoga-based retreat center in North America. So this is a retreat center. People come from all faiths and backgrounds and traditions, come to Kripalu. We offer hundreds of different educational and spiritual programs here. People come just to come on retreat, to kind of leave the world behind and connect with themselves, connect with spirit, learn about health and wellness. We have somewhere around anywhere from like 30 to 50,000 guests a year who come to Kripalu. So we've got 350 staff who work here, and we have 4 different schools. We have a yoga school, an Ayurveda school, we have a yoga therapy school, and the school that I founded is the Kripalu School of Mindful Outdoor Leadership. And that's the school where I train people to rewild, to become mindful outdoor guides, and to help connect people back home with the restorative healing benefits of relationship with the natural world.
Well, let's talk more about that outdoor part of what you do. And your book, by the way, is just fascinating. It's a wonderful book. It's called Rewilding. And the subtitle is Meditations, Practices, and Skills for Awakening in Nature. What would you say? How would you define rewilding? What's that mean?
Yeah, rewilding is an interesting term. So I think there's probably 2 main ways to think about rewilding. The first is the rewilding of ecosystems. And so just an example of this might be perhaps there's a fishery, like an area in the ocean that has been fished heavily. And so stocks are low in that area. So rewilding of that ecosystem might mean setting limits and allowing that ecosystem to replenish itself. So human beings kind of step back and monitor and try to allow the innate intelligence of that ecosystem to do what it does and rewild. Okay. Another way to think about it would be like something like that happened at Chernobyl, where you had this horrific event and then people left, and then nature just kind of moved in and took over. If you look at like images of Chernobyl today, there's huge trees growing everywhere, and you can kind of observe. It's an interesting case study in what happens when human beings kind of step out of a situation. What does the natural world do? So the rewilding of ecosystems is kind of like one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is, and this is kind of the way I write about it in the book, is the rewilding of the human being. And so in order to think about this, we have to think about ourselves as an animal species in a way. And that we have been, to a degree, domesticated by the structures and the comforts and the conveniences of modern civilization. So just to kind of flesh that out a little bit, hunter-gatherer, our ancestors and people living today who are still hunter-gatherers, they source their own food from the landscape. They eat usually a pretty wide variety of wild foods. They move quite a bit. They engage in a wide variety of different movements every single day: squatting, reaching, climbing, walking, running, swimming. They're walking 10 to 20 miles a day. They have relationships with a wide variety of plants and animals. Their bodies are in contact with the environment. Their senses are stimulated by the environment, right? Generally, hunter-gatherer societies tend to be in pretty deep and integral communities, communal structures. So multi-generational relationships, being reliant on one another. So a lot of these are just some of the components of, you might say, like an ancestral human way of being, something that most of us have lost with
Mhm.
modern life. So, of course, we know today the modern American spends more than 11 hours a day on a screen, more than 90% of their lives inside. Our diet consists of like a very narrow fraction of the wild, nutrient dense foods that our ancestors knew. So, we're eating a lot of processed, kind of nutrient poor foods oftentimes. And then isolation. So, many people are living in situations where, they actually don't have these multi-generational social structures around them. So human rewilding is a journey. It's an inquiry. It's a practice of what would it look like to begin to remember and reclaim some of the richness, some of the goodness, some of the benefit of our ancestral ways of being human in a closer relationship to the ecosystem that we live with other plants and animals and with other human beings. And it's a really big topic. It's a very broad spectrum. So there's lots of ways you can begin that journey. People often think it's like, well, I can't go live off the grid and, be a survivalist or a hunter gatherer. And it's not, doesn't have to be anything extreme like that.
Yeah, so it can be obviously small steps,
Yeah.
just finding time each day to be outside,
Mhm.
to be in nature, and nature could be, a small yard. It could be, walking along a river, or it could be even, in a city, finding a
Yeah.
small part of a park to just have nature present. What do you think? Physiologically is happening when you make an intention to be outdoors and to be present with nature, and let's say separate from the idea of meditating or doing yoga, but
Mhm.
just to be present in nature. What do you think is happening? I know the studies of forest bathing and many studies, but uh, that show the positive effects that happen. And from your own experience and your research and writing the book, maybe get us a feel for the process physiologically that
Yeah.
changes us in a way that results in positive emotions and positive physiologic effects.
Sure. Um, One of the lead researchers who was at the forefront of a lot of that forest bathing research was a gentleman named Yoshifumi Miyazaki from Japan. And he summed it up, I thought, pretty simply and eloquently. He says, for 99.9% of our evolutionary history, we were outside. And he says a feeling of comfort can be achieved if our rhythms are synchronized with those of our environment. Um, so knowing that as human beings, we evolved, really out of the earth itself, right? We spent most of our evolutionary history outdoors and in contact with the elements and connected to the seasons, right? Because, just until a few decades ago, the vast majority of human beings were agriculturalists and were living in rural areas. And anybody who's ever had a garden or kind of lived in ever had an experience of somebody who has to harvest their food from the land in one way, shape, or form, you kind of sync up with the rhythms of the seasons. And all these holidays that we have every year, all the major holidays, many of them are really old. Even Groundhog Day is like a really old holiday, which is about, how much longer is this winter going to last? Because I don't know how much food I have left. And the groundhogs are that hibernating animal. Like when they come up out of the ground, that's a sign. Oh, maybe the dandelions are going to come up and we're going to have something green to eat. Right? It's so interesting. It's like, that's a really deep holiday. That's, it's an old one. So these little ways that, we can sync up with rhythms, circadian rhythms. These things are really important on a lot of levels. Just to give you an example, like part of, I think human health, a lot of it has to do with syncing our rhythms up with the rhythms of the universe, with the rhythms of the seasons. We know how important sleep is. And what we're learning, now that we've got these screens all the time, is that, if we're looking at these screens at night and that blue light is coming in, it's kind of blocking our melatonin production, which is the neurotransmitter that helps us sleep, right? And so if people aren't sleeping well, then they're not really going to be doing well, right? And we know that the immune system fires up when we're sleeping. So just one thing I tell folks that I work with is, like, when you get into the fall and the winter, one night a week, pretend like you live off the grid, let the lights go down really low, let your body and your inner circadian rhythm sync up with the fact that it's actually getting dark outside. And when you start to yawn because it's dark in your house, go to bed, even if it's like 6:30 or 7, and just see how that feels, right? Because that's what people used to do. So, different ways we can sync up with the seasons, with the cycle of light and dark, so we can sleep better and heal better, is really important. But I think it just comes down to this idea that from an evolutionary standpoint, we're designed to be in harmony with the natural world. And so when we're walking outside in the forest in just a really relaxed way, and we just set that intention to just be present and not rush and just enjoy it, there's a lot that's happening physiologically. So we're breathing in the air, the atmosphere that the trees are creating. When you're in the woods, the quality of the air is completely different than when you're in town. It's a different kind of air you're breathing because it's full of these essential oil compounds that the trees are producing. And this is like it's like the vital essence of these trees. It's part of their immune system. Sometimes it's that Christmas tree smell. These are called phytoncides. And when we breathe those in, the effects are unbelievable. So, we see cortisol levels plummet like 14% after just a 45-minute stroll through a forest. Heart rate and blood pressure go down. Natural killer cell counts in the bloodstream go up. So part of our immune response gets stimulated. People report feeling in a better mood. And it's kind of like this idea, part of the theory of all that is, well, we evolved out there. So if we put ourselves back in our natural habitat, there's going to be a correlation there. And the story I always tell folks is, just imagine that, we were observing like a pride of lions in South Africa. And we decided that we were going to rescue one of those lionesses from that environment and, give her the benefit of living in modern society. And we got her a apartment in Brooklyn and like a Peloton for lions. And we got her a Zoom account so she could keep in touch with the pride. And we shipped organic free range zebra, frozen right to her door. Got her, a great healthcare package, and checked in on her in a couple of years. And I always ask people, like, which lion is happier and healthier?
Yeah, obviously, yes. So all the modern conveniences can't buy you happiness, and hasn't really done a real good job of buying health in the United States when you look at how we compare in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality, etc.
Yeah.
So then that's a great analogy. We might be able to provide that lion with the physiologic needs, but who's going to be happier?
Yeah, it's and there's a lot of wonderful things about living in the modern world. But I think it's a fair question, and this kind of gets to the heart of what rewilding is about. It's like, what have we lost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's clear that we've gained. I mean, in fact, probably I'm not an expert on this, but until we started cooking food to be able to get as many nutrients as possible out of eating cooked food as opposed to raw food, and getting enough that we didn't have to expend so much energy catching our food and collecting it, that we were able to store it, that caused us to get bigger brains, and we've developed into this species that has achieved a lot, including intelligence and designing and manufacturing. But along the way, we've lost some things. And I think what you're proposing isn't that we all go live Walden like in the woods, but that we find time each day that we will be happier and in some measures healthier if we find ways of rewilding ourselves, not totally abstaining from modern life,
Oh.
but to find pieces of the wild that we can partake in on a regular basis.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways we can do that. And one of the ways I suggest for folks is a sit spot. Um, a sit spot's a really great way. And basically what that is what I tell people is, when you get up in the morning and you're having your first cup of coffee or whatever you like to drink in the morning, before you go on your phone, um, go sit by the window or go out on your deck and put up a bird feeder, or if you've got something you can look at out there, anything in the yard, even if you're in the city and you've got like a fire escape, put a bird feeder out there, and for the first 15 or 20 minutes just sip your coffee and just like rest your attention on what is happening at the dawn of a new day, and just give yourself that opportunity to watch the light increase, notice the weather, notice what kind of wildlife might be present. And I get very excited when a gray squirrel hops through my backyard. It's um, every creature we share this planet with is amazing. And, squirrels are amazing, and a chickadee is amazing. And, one of the things that I think a lot of us have lost in the modern time is a feeling of deep relationship with plants and animals. And another great book I'd recommend to folks is one called Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr.
Hmm.
Paul Kimmerer. Yeah. And she
Yes.
talks about species loneliness in that book. Species loneliness. And I
And
think that is a really big one. She says it's a deep, unnamed sadness. Uh, because our ancestors had relationships with a lot of different plants and animals. I think when Teddy Roosevelt was in the White House, I can't remember the exact number of animals that were in the White House, but there was like over 30 different pets in there, like raccoons and turtles, and like you wouldn't even believe it. Like his kids had so many pets that were animals that they gathered and themselves, and um, that's a big one. So just having like a little bird feeder out there, getting to know a bird, having a sit spot is a really important way to connect with the place that we live. And part of why this is about more than just our own health and well-being, because when human beings have a deep connection with the land that they live on, they're far more likely to care for that land.
right.
Right. So I think, in terms of us also wanting to be good caretakers, that actually starts with having a deep connection.
Yeah, the interconnectedness that we have with nature. One thing when you look at, you go to, let's say, National Institutes of Health website, and you look at what do you need to do to be healthy, and it'll tell you that you need to do a minimum of 90 minutes per week of intense aerobic, that you should do X number of minutes of resistance training, that you should eat this many fruits or vegetables per day. But I don't think in those recommendations from the government or from a health sites are, and you should spend 120 minutes per
Oh, yeah.
week
That's
in
right.
nature.
That's the exact amount. You know that.
Yeah, 120 minutes per week in nature. The National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, the AD, American Dietitians, nobody puts that in the minutes that you should do. We know how many fruits and vegetables and aerobic and resistance, but I think it's would be great if more organizations started to catch on to how much joy and improvement in health can happen by bringing nature into our lives and incorporate that as guidelines how we should all live our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, so yeah, the 120 minutes is like the new 10,000 steps, right? So I always tell people that, if you can get outside 2 hours a week, break it up however you want to, do it all at once or break it up. It doesn't matter. Just set that as a minimum of a self-care practice for you. Because yeah, physical and mental health is elevated positively as a result of that minimum amount of time spent outdoors. But I think, that mental health piece is really interesting. And I think it's one of these things that doesn't get talked about as much. But, in my experience, spending time outdoors in kind of a mindful state of awareness. So, not hiking to get somewhere, but just walking and being very open and present to what's happening and what I'm noticing, and then guiding others to do that through trainings and through retreats. One thing that is really apparent is that that time out there, that sort of spaciousness, when people have an opportunity to just be, without a goal, but to just be present outdoors. Those moments and that time can have profound impacts on people emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And there's a lot to be said there. And there's a whole field of eco-psychology, that looks at the mind. The human mind is a product of nature, right? Because the brain developed as part of the body, right? As a product of nature. And so, we want to think about the impact of environment and the natural world and its impact on human psychological health. And one thing that I noticed from many, many people I speak to is that, when you go out and you sit and you kind of look at nature, and this is part of rewilding, there's a perspective shift that happens. It's really common for human beings, right? For all of us to get caught up in our own personal story, our own trials and tribulations. One of the things that spending time in nature does is it kind of helps us get out of that little bubble that we're in. And when we see, mountains, and we see, old trees, and we're sitting out there and we see these big cycles that we're part of. We look up at the night sky, we see stars, right? And we get a sense of that we're part of something much, much bigger than our own, small, very important and personal experience, but it helps us step out of it. And that can be really, really, I mean, I think that's really vital. And that's an important piece that so many people need, that little perspective shift.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talk about a spiritual perspective, and I guess you could use different names for it, but this, what I hear you say and what it brings to mind to me is this sense of awe and wonder that happens, and I would, also to pick up on what you said, there's this paradox of things that happens at the same time, like, I can just picture myself up at the top of a mountain and the wind and the you just see this vast, and you feel like such a insignificant speck in a huge nature, but at the same time you feel special to have this sense of awe and wonder, and how in one setting you can feel both significant and
Yeah.
insignificant in a
Yeah.
way that, makes you think of something bigger than yourself. And if you want to call that God or you want to call that spiritual, but there's something that happens in nature, in those settings where you just sort of take it all in and feel part of something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And reading different spiritual texts, the presence of the natural world is there in all of them. And you know, time spent out in nature also, so a lot of the folks I work with here, probably spend a lot of time in a yoga studio and a meditation studio. And when you're in those spaces, everything's very controlled. You're in a meditation room that you got a door, you got windows, the temperature is controlled. A bear is not going to wander through your meditation classroom, right? Um, you know, you're really isolated. But when you're out in the natural world, you never know like what lesson, what teacher is going to show up. So you might be out there sitting just, and you might get a really profound lesson in the impermanence of things. You might come upon the remains of an animal on the land. You might walk out and one day your favorite tree that you've always loved is got blown over in the middle of the night, and there it is on the ground. And then you might notice that, out of that stump now, a young tree is growing, right? So when we slow down and we give ourselves time, like it's like the natural world is like a spiritual text that's just there. And if we can give ourselves the opportunity to slow down and open, there's all kinds of lessons and
Right.
things that we're going to stumble upon. And what I love about it is like, you just never know what it's going to be. It's always like a surprise.
Yeah, yeah. I have a question that it's a little bit of a paradox, and I want to see if you can bring it together. So, clearly you're, um, an expert in meditation and yoga and then in nature. And when I think of meditation, I think of, be here now. And I think of bringing your mind back to whatever the focus is, whether it is your breath or you're observing something. And then you also talk about this wide focus that happens with being in nature. And I know there's one experience might be sitting and actually meditating with a narrow focus in nature, but that nature kind of invites you to this more 360 wide focus that can be healing. And maybe talk a little bit about the difference between be here now, narrow focus, and the wide focus that happens in nature, and how we can get healthy benefits from each of those perspectives.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so to me, like when I think about that, I think about hunter gatherers, and I think about the kind of awareness that a hunter gatherer has to have of having this really wide open awareness of kind of um, assessing the environment and being aware of what's going on in the field, and then periodically bringing that focus in on a particular point, right? So the way that this shows up, I think one of the ways I talk about it in modern life is, um, I think we live in a culture today where a lot of us are probably spending a lot of our time, maybe professionally, in a very super focused state of awareness where we're trying to focus. Okay. So let's say, you're trying to write a really complicated email and you have to bring a lot of threads together and compose this because it's going to go out to a group of people. Okay. And in order to do that, you have to inhibit distractions. So maybe somebody's texting you, maybe things are popping up in Teams on your computer, and then you have to search something on the internet, and you open up a page, and then there's all these news stories, and that kind of pulls your attention off. And then you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Oh, right. And then you got to come back. So researchers have shown that process of inhibiting all those distractions in order to try to focus leads to something called directed attention fatigue. And it's just your frontal lobe gets tired from the inhibiting that you're trying to do in order to focus. So this is called directed attention fatigue. Most of us probably experience this every day, where around like maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon, your just productivity starts to decline because your frontal lobe is just tired. You've been trying to focus and you have a lot of distractions. Well, these researchers out at the University of Michigan found the antidote to this, how to reverse it. And it's fascination attention, kind of like what you were getting at here, like awe and fascination. So when you feel that you have directed attention fatigue, what they recommend that you do is you look out the window for a little while and you just like watch the birds, watch the clouds. You don't try to control your awareness at all. You let it go to whatever is fascinating, whatever is beautiful. And that's referred to as soft fascination. So things that are great for soft fascination are bird watching. This is what we do when we go to the beach, and you just sit there and just watch the waves kind of come in and come out. And in a way, it's like you kind of entrain with that rhythm. It's like you kind of go into a trance almost. That is incredibly restorative for the frontal lobe. And it can help us get back on track and be productive again. But it's also, it's an alternate form of awareness from directed attention. And we just aren't really designed to be hyper direct focused for 8 hours a day. So you got to take breaks throughout the day. And I encourage everybody set up by the window and give yourself permission to get up, walk around, look out the window, 5 minutes or so. You're going to feel better when you come back. And this is really kind of similar. We're trying to recreate, you might imagine maybe there was a time when your ancestors might have been weaving a basket, by the fire and focusing. And then, the wind would blow and they'd pause and they'd look up and they'd look at the sky and they'd smile at a friend and they'd have a chat and then they'd go back to focusing. So that fascination attention is a really important rewilding practice. And it's an easy thing to just build into your day.
Yeah, and they're complementary. I mean, with one another, the intense focus. So for those, maybe give us some practical tips for, okay, I want to get my 120 120 minutes per week of wildness into my life. But I have a job and I've got a family and I've got to sleep so how do we get started for those who don't have a nature practice? How can someone get started? 120 minutes just seems overwhelming. How do I get started to have a nature practice?
Yeah. So, I guess, one thing would be, try to get that sit spot in the morning, if you can wake up a little earlier than everybody in the house, have that cup of coffee, resist the urge to go right onto your phone in the morning, give yourself that gift, right? That actually, I'm convinced that going onto the phone and getting the news or whatever is going on is like kind of a jolt to the nervous system right away. So see if you can just give yourself that opportunity. Just look out the window for a few minutes while you drink your coffee. So that's number one. Okay, number two, take that 120 minutes and just break it up. Do you have a lunch hour at work? Do you have half an hour in the middle of the day? Go outside. Get 10 or 15 minutes of walking in during those lunch hours, right? If you do that 10 minutes a day, then you got 50 minutes, right there. That's just 10 minutes a day. And on the weekend, make it a practice. Say, I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to go for a hike, I'm going to garden, I'm going to play a sport outdoors, whatever it is. But you have to make a commitment to yourself that you're going to do that. You're going to get the vitamin D on your skin, right? You're going to get that movement in. Human beings, we are made to move. We are not sedentary creatures. We are movers. So getting that outdoor movement in. If you exercise, okay, let's say you go to the gym or you go on the treadmill, take those exercise times, exercise outside, right? So instead of being on the treadmill, go outside. The Nordic people say there's no bad weather, just bad clothing. Make sure you've got good gear for whatever season it is, and just get that exercise time. Go outside. If you lift weights, do push-ups outside, do squats outside, do pull-ups on a tree, right? Just transition some of those things you do to doing them outdoors. Can be a big one.
Yeah, it's a 2-for-1. You get a 2-for-1. You get to do your aerobic hours and your resistance training hours along with your nature hours.
Yeah, it's super important. And then the other one I would say to folks is share your outdoor love with children and young people. We've got a generation of kids who are coming up right now. They're experiencing something that no generation has ever experienced, which is, access to the internet, and a really a kind of a totally untested amount of time accessing all of that information. They need the gift of connection with the natural world, and so share it. Take your kids out on a walk, unplug. At the end of the day, make a policy in your house. The phones go in a box on top of the fridge after 6 o'clock or 7, and do other non-screen related things. This is important. I think we're kind of living in a time right now where we're kind of in uncharted territory with technology, and I think technology is probably the primary thing that has separated us from our connection with the outdoors. So any way that we can begin to take control and sort of put technology in its right place and not be controlled by it is going to help us to rewild and to come back into some kind of a balance here.
Yeah, you remind me of wisdom from my mom as a kid. It would be, you kids get outside and get the stink blown off you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thirsty. Well, the garden hose is out there.
Yeah.
Just open up that garden hose.
Hey, Micah, we're gonna do a little Q&A here. So we've got a live studio audience here that has some questions for you, and we also have folks that are live streaming us. Again, our guest today is Micah Mortali, and Micah wrote this wonderful book, Rewilding, and so we'll open it up to questions.
Hello, Micah. At your retreats, does people come to rewild to heal their bodies from injuries? And tell us a little more about your retreats.
Were you able to hear that, Micah?
Yeah,
About your retreat. Yeah, who comes to your retreats and who's it intended for? Is it people looking to heal themselves from some malady, or what are the reasons people come, and how do you take care of them?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I offer a variety of different retreats at Kripalu, but we have a lot of different ones. So if you go to the Kripalu website, you'll be able to see the amazing selection of different programs that are offered for people going through all different kinds of experiences in life. The programs that I lead tend to be nature focused. So sometimes that's a mindful hiking weekend. I do lead retreats for men, mindful outdoor programs that are designed to support men in particular. I also offer outdoor foraging and outdoor cooking programs that are mindful focused. And I also offer a mindful archery program where we kind of get into that ancient practice and the meditative aspects that are part of bow and arrow. So those are just some of the programs I lead. But then the training in the school that I lead is a program where we actually certify people to become Kripalu mindful outdoor guides. And so this is the program that Mary went through. And these folks then go back to their communities, and they actually are working and guiding groups from all different populations through kind of a simple 9-step experience. So it's kind of like a yoga class, but we don't do postures. It's more of a kind of a mindful outdoor experience where there's different steps to it and different practices that people are doing. And it's all really designed to help people get into their parasympathetic nervous system, their rest and digest state of being when they're calm and alert and at peace. And then be able to kind of engage with the natural world from that place and reap the benefits of it. So that's a 9-day training. That's a pretty intensive program. We're out in the forest from 6:30 in the morning till 6 at night. No matter what the weather, we're outdoors. People do sleep in the building and take their meals in the building, but all of the program sessions are here on the property, and it's a really beautiful property. So we get folks from all walks of life in our programs here, people of every age, and we have folks leaving our training who are serving, lots of different populations, Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+, veterans, children, homeschoolers, public, private, higher ed, doctors, therapists. It's pretty neat.
Great. Thank you. Other questions for Micah? Here we go. Gary?
I'm kind of curious as to the type of diet that you have. I know that you talked early on in the fact that, what we eat today is, really, out of the stores, which is, probably not the best stuff for us, but just curious. And I know that you indicated a little bit earlier that that you learn and teach, people to cook outdoors and stuff. So could you explain that to us?
So is it like hickory nuts, mushrooms, and gray squirrel?
How'd you know? Hickory nuts are one of my favorite wild foods. Yeah. Wow, that sounds delicious. Hickory nuts, gray squirrel, and some kind of mushrooms. Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Yeah. We got morel. We got lots of morels here.
You got morels? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great question. I'm definitely not a nutrition expert. I do know a little bit about foraging, hunting and gathering, and I do hunt and gather myself. But to be completely honest with you, I've got 3 kids, and my wife and I have got kids, elementary school, college. We got busy lives, so I get most of my food from Stop and Shop. So that said, I do like to supplement with wild food. I guess my own personal philosophy is I try to eat as much whole food as possible. So like I try to avoid processed food as much as possible. So I just eat vegetables, I eat meat, I eat fruit, I eat grains. I try to stick to whole foods, and I try to stick to seasonal foods. So try to eat what's in season where I live. And that's sort of it, just in the idea of kind of getting in sync with the seasons and with what is local. So as much as possible, I think folks should support their local farmers and, try to eat food that's coming from close to where you live. Other than that, I kind of think the food thing is interesting because people have such strong opinions about food, and it can separate people. And my personal feeling is just eat what feels right for you. I don't have a strong ideology about it other than those things that I just shared.
And when you do have folks that you're taking out in the weekend for foraging, you mentioned that that's an activity that you do. So you forage for, I assume, fruits and nuts and.
Yeah. So we go out there, usually a lot of dandelion, plantain, staghorn sumac, hickory nuts if it's in the fall. Gosh, what else do we get off of the property here? Red clover, black birch. We make tea with white pine and eastern hemlock. We make a delicious drink with the staghorn sumac aid, which is pretty cool. And dandelions are kind of everywhere and incredibly nutritious and super prolific on the land. So we gather a lot of dandelion. Mushrooms for sure, definitely. Love to forage for mushrooms. So yeah, the morels, the chanterelles, the chicken of the woods, the hen of the woods, black trumpets. There's turkey tail. There's all kinds of amazing stuff out there. You just got to know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, that would be good to have a little guidance when you start. Morels are pretty easy to find, not easy to find, but easy to distinguish and recognize in Iowa. But some of the things growing on trees that are mushroom-like, I probably wouldn't want to be the first one to taste it. And
Right.
You mentioned eastern hemlock. I assume that's not the hemlock that one would take if you're part of the Hemlock Society.
Correct. Yeah, and that's not what Socrates drank. That was the European hemlock bush.
Okay.
But the eastern hemlock tree, Tsuga canadensis, is edible.
Good.
And high in vitamin C and very delicious. Yeah.
And Micah, you know the difference between the two. So
I've actually never seen European hemlock bush. But I know my eastern hemlock trees very well.
Okay. Well, we've come to the end of this. Anything else you want to share? Last tidbits about rewilding that we haven't touched on?
Well, I guess I would just encourage everybody to connect with the land that you live on. And I do always like to say that sometimes people have a tendency to think that, if I don't live near a national park or someplace really wild, I can't rewild. And that's not true at all. You can rewild in the middle of New York City. There's nature everywhere. And in fact, we are nature. Like our bodies are earth. So nature's with us always. And so no matter how small it might seem, we can connect deeply with the intelligence and the wisdom of the natural world in very simple and very accessible ways. So I just would like to tell everybody that and to always keep that in mind. And, I think that in this time that we're living in, it's probably true always. I think getting outside and giving ourselves the chance to unplug from the World Wide Web and plug into the Wood Wide Web is really important and really restorative and really calming. And we could all use a little bit of that. So Great. I'll leave it with that.
Well, super. Well, from one animal to another animal, thank you for helping us learn about rewilding. And for all of you that tuned in tonight, thanks for being with us. If you know someone that would benefit by watching or listening to this program, it will be available on demand tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel or the Mercy Cancer Center website. Thanks for joining us. Please join us again next week. Thank you.